I met Sarah on a quiet afternoon in the summer of 2009. I had just finished a long shift at the precinct, still getting used to the grind of being a rookie cop, and I wandered into a little bookstore downtown. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went, small, quiet, walls lined with old, leather-bound books that smelled of time itself. But something about it pulled me in. She was sitting behind the counter, completely absorbed in a book, with a cup of coffee beside her. Dark hair tucked behind her ear, lost in the world of whatever she was reading. I don't know why, but I stood there for a moment, watching her, trying to understand what it was about her that made the whole room feel different. Then, as if sensing my presence, she looked up, smiled, and just like that, I was done for. Sarah had a way of drawing people in without even trying. She wasn't loud or flashy. She was the kind of woman who made you want to slow down, just to be in her orbit a little longer. She had a quiet confidence, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. She spoke softly, but when she talked, you listened. She was thoughtful, observant, always reading something, always thinking about something deeper. I started coming back to that bookstore more often, using the excuse of looking for something to read. Sarah saw right through it, of course, but she humored me. We talk about books, about the city, about life. She was different from anyone I had ever met. Where my world was built around structure and order, police reports, rules, regulations, Sarah lived in a world of stories and ideas. She saw beauty in things I would have walked right past. She had an artist's soul, even if she never called herself one. We started dating a few weeks later. Our first date was at a little Italian place she loved, tucked away in a quiet part of town. I remember how she talked about books the way other people talked about old friends. I remember how she made me feel like I was more than just my job, more than the uniform I wore every day. I knew early on that she was the one. There was never any doubt in my mind. She fit into my life so seamlessly, like she was meant to be there. When I proposed, it was simple, just the two of us in our apartment, candles flickering on the table. She said yes before I even finished asking. Our wedding was small, just close friends and family. It was perfect. We danced in a little garden under string lights, and I remember thinking I had never seen anything as beautiful as Sarah in that moment. We built a life together, brick by brick. We bought a house, a little two-story place with a front porch, the kind of house that felt like a home the moment we stepped inside. Sarah worked from home as a freelance editor, which meant she was always there when I came back from a shift. It was comforting, knowing that no matter how chaotic my job was, I could come home to her, to warmth, to peace. I never doubted, not for a second, that we had something real. Something solid. Marriage with Sarah was easy in the beginning. There was a rhythm to our life that felt effortless, like we had fallen into step with each other without even trying. I'd wake up early for my shift at the precinct, and she'd be curled up in bed, half awake, mumbling something about needing just 5 more minutes. I always kissed her forehead before I left. It was our thing. Some mornings she'd reach out and grab my hand before I could walk away, holding on for just a second longer. I lived for those small moments. Sarah had a way of making the ordinary feel special. She loved slow mornings with coffee, sitting out on the porch with a blanket draped over her shoulders, a book balanced in her lap. She had an entire collection of mismatched mugs because she believed every book deserved its own cup of coffee. It was one of those little quirks that made her who she was. She saw poetry in things I barely noticed. I, on the other hand, was the opposite. My world was built around routine and order. That's the way it had to be in my line of work. Being a cop meant dealing with chaos, with people at their worst. I couldn't afford to be careless, not when every decision could mean life or death. But Sarah was my balance. She softened the edges of my world, reminding me that life wasn't just rules and procedures. Even with our differences, we understood each other. Sarah never minded that my job took up so much of my time. She knew that being a police officer wasn't just a career for me. It was something I had wanted since I was a kid, something that felt like a calling. And I made sure she never felt like she came second. Sunday was our day, no matter what. I'd turn off my work phone, and we'd spend the whole day together. Breakfast at our favorite diner, long drives with no destination, lazy afternoons watching old movies. We didn't need grand gestures. Our love was in the quiet moments. The way she'd slip her hand into mine when we walked down the street. The way I'd find little notes tucked into my lunch bag when she packed it for me. Don't forget to smile today. Counting the hours till you're home. You are my favorite. For the first few years, I thought we had everything. A solid foundation, a love that wasn't just passionate but comfortable, secure. It wasn't the kind of love that burned fast and faded. It was steady, the kind you could rely on. People would always say that the first few years of marriage were the hardest, but that wasn't true for us. If anything, those years were the easiest. Life felt simple, even with my demanding job. Sarah never complained about the late nights, the missed calls, the long hours. She made our house feel like home, made coming back to her feel like a reward at the end of every shift. I used to think that if you loved someone enough, if you gave them everything you had, then nothing could touch you. That love alone was enough to keep two people together. I was wrong. The years passed, and life settled into a familiar routine. My job kept me busy, but I always made time for Sarah. She was my anchor, the person who grounded me when the weight of the world felt too heavy. I never took that for granted. We built traditions without realizing it. Friday nights were for takeout and bad action movies. Saturdays were for errands, grocery shopping, fixing things around the house, walking through the farmer's market even though we rarely bought anything. And Sundays? Sundays were sacred. Those were our days, the one thing I refused to let work take from me. Sarah was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. She was patient when I came home too exhausted to talk, understanding when I had to cancel plans because of a case. She never pressured me to open up about the things I saw on the job, though I knew she worried. She once told me that loving a cop meant accepting that there would always be parts of me she would never fully know. I think she made peace with that early on. She had her own life too. Editing books for authors, spending time in cafes with her laptop, getting lost in worlds that existed only on paper. She had a small circle of friends, other writers, a few women she'd met at a book club, an old college roommate she still kept in touch with. I liked that she had her own space, her own interests. I never wanted her to feel like she had to shape her life around mine. For a long time, I thought we had it figured out. We were in sync, moving through life side by side. I wasn't the kind of man who doubted his marriage. I didn't worry about whether Sarah was happy or if she wished for something more. I assumed that if something was wrong, she would tell me. That was the kind of relationship we had, open, honest, built on trust. There were little things I noticed over the years, but they never seemed important at the time. Small shifts in her habits, tiny changes in the way she spoke or moved. But people change. That's what I told myself. We were growing older, settling into ourselves. Nothing to worry about. Looking back, I wonder if I should have asked more questions. Paid closer attention. But hindsight is always clearer, isn't it? For years, I believed that love, real love, was unshakable. That if you built something strong enough, nothing could break it. I had no idea how wrong I was. It started with small things, so small that I barely noticed them at first. A shift in Sarah's routine, a hesitation in her voice, a certain distance that wasn't there before. If I had been paying closer attention, maybe I would have caught it earlier. But the thing about trust is that it makes you blind to warning signs. She began staying out later than usual, saying she was meeting friends for dinner or attending a book club meeting that I had never heard of before. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sarah had always been independent, and I liked that about her. But then, it became more frequent. She started dressing differently, not in a way that was obvious, just subtle changes. A little more effort in her appearance when she went out, new clothes that I had never seen before. I remember the first time I noticed it, really noticed it. She was leaving for one of her supposed book club meetings, wearing a dress that was just a little too nice for a casual night out with friends. She looked beautiful, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I told myself I was overthinking it. Then there was her phone. Sarah had never been the type to guard her phone like it was a secret diary, but suddenly, it was always face down on the table. She started leaving the room to take calls, her voice hushed, her laughter softer, like she was trying to keep it from reaching me. When I asked who she was talking to, she always had an answer: a friend, an author she was working with, a relative checking in. The answers were always easy, always practiced. And I believed her. Nights changed too. There were times when I would come home late from a shift, expecting to find her asleep in bed like always. But more and more, I found the bed empty. Sometimes she was downstairs, curled up on the couch with a book, claiming she couldn't sleep. Other times, she was just gone. Went for a late-night drive, she'd say. Needed some air. I never questioned it. I can still remember the first time I felt real doubt creep in, the first time the thought entered my mind and refused to leave. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had come home early. Sarah hadn't heard me pull into the driveway, and when I walked inside, she was standing in the kitchen, her phone in her hand, smiling at the screen. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen in a long time, the kind that wasn't meant for me. She looked up, startled, as if she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. "Oh," she said, slipping her phone into her pocket. "I didn't hear you come in." I asked her who she was texting, and her answer came too quickly, too smoothly. "Just Emily. A friend of hers." I had no reason to doubt her, no proof that she was lying. But something about the way she said it, the way she avoided my eyes, planted a seed of suspicion in my mind. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that Sarah loved me, that we were solid, that she would never betray me. But trust, once cracked, never quite feels the same. Doubt is a slow, creeping thing. It starts small, like a whisper in the back of your mind, easy to brush aside. But once it takes root, it grows. It latches on to every little thing, twisting moments that once seemed innocent into something else entirely. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Sarah was just going through a phase, that maybe she was restless, maybe she needed space. But then the late nights became more frequent. The explanations became vaguer. The distance between us, the kind I once believed could never exist, widened until I could feel it in every conversation, in every touch that now felt forced. She started pulling away in ways that were hard to ignore. She stopped waiting up for me after long shifts. Stopped reaching for my hand when we walked together. The little notes she used to leave for me, those reminders of love, of thoughtfulness, stopped appearing. And when I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, I began to notice that she never leaned into it the way she used to. The moments that should have reassured me only left me feeling emptier. I'd catch her staring at her phone, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips, and the second she noticed me watching, she'd lock the screen and set it aside. I wasn't stupid. I knew that kind of smile. It wasn't meant for me. I started paying closer attention, not because I wanted to but because I had to. I noticed that she had new perfumes, ones I hadn't bought for her, ones I had never smelled on her before. She started dressing differently, even around the house, like she was waiting for someone else to see her. There were times when she'd disappear for hours, telling me she was running errands, yet coming home with nothing to show for it. One night I asked her about it. I tried to be casual, tried not to let on that the doubt had turned into something heavier inside me. "You've been going out a lot lately," I said. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, just for a second, but I caught it. "Yeah," she said. "I just feel cooped up sometimes. I like driving around. It helps me clear my head." That might have been true. But it wasn't the whole truth. A few days later, she left for another so-called book club meeting. I waited 10 minutes, then checked our shared bank account. A dinner charge, 1 plate, 1 drink. I told myself maybe she had eaten early. Maybe she was meeting the others later. But the lie sounded thin even in my own head. The worst part was, I still wanted to believe her. I still wanted to be the man who never had to question his wife, the man who trusted without hesitation. But I wasn't that man anymore. I was starting to realize that maybe I had never really known Sarah at all. Something had changed. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started, but I could feel it. It was in the way Sarah moved, the way she spoke, the way she seemed just a little too distant, a little too distracted. It wasn't anything obvious. No screaming fights, no slammed doors. Just a shift, subtle but unmistakable. She was gone more often now. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had always valued her independence, had always liked spending time at coffee shops or bookstores, places where she could sit and read without distraction. But now, she was leaving without telling me where she was going. When I asked, she gave vague answers. Just out. Ran some errands. Needed some fresh air. I told myself not to read into it. People needed space. Even in the strongest marriages, routines changed. But something about the way she said it, casual, practiced, stuck with me. She started coming home late, later than she ever used to. It wasn't every night, but it was often enough for me to notice. I'd hear her car pull into the driveway long after dark, and when she stepped inside, she moved quietly, like she didn't want to wake me. Sometimes, she'd say she lost track of time. Other times, she wouldn't say anything at all. There were little things, too. A new perfume she had never worn before. Dresses I didn't recognize. More time spent looking at her phone, smiling at something I couldn't see. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, but it felt different. Lighter. Like a habit rather than a desire. I began to notice how much space had formed between us. We still ate dinner together, but the conversations weren't the same. She didn't ask about my day, and when I asked about hers, she answered in short, clipped sentences. There was no more laughing over stupid things, no more long talks about nothing. The air between us felt heavier, filled with things unsaid. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was just reading too much into things. But a part of me, a quiet part buried under all the rationalizations, whispered that something wasn't right. I ignored it. For now. The distance between us kept growing, but neither of us talked about it. It was like an unspoken agreement: ignore the cracks, pretend everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Sarah was gone more often now. She stopped giving excuses altogether, stopped offering explanations. I'd come home from a shift to an empty house, no note, no text, nothing. Hours would pass, and when she finally walked through the door, she'd act like it was normal. Like it had always been this way. She was careful, though. Careful not to be too obvious. Careful not to give me a reason to question her. But there were signs, small, almost invisible, but there. The way she kept her phone close, always face down. The way she would step out of the room to answer a call. The way she would be dressed up for what she claimed was just a trip to the store, her makeup just a little too perfect for an afternoon of errands. I started waking up in the middle of the night to find her side of the bed empty. At first, I told myself she had trouble sleeping, that she was downstairs reading like she used to. But when I found her standing by the window, staring out into the night, her phone in her hand, I knew it was something else. I asked her once, casually, where she had been. She hesitated just long enough for me to notice before she forced a smile. Nowhere, she said. Just needed some air. She had never been a good liar. I could feel it now, the thing I had been trying so hard not to see. The weight of something unspoken pressing down on both of us. The silence that used to be comfortable now felt suffocating. One night, I came home earlier than expected. The house was dark. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls. I sat there, staring at the empty space where she should have been, and for the first time, I let myself wonder. Where was she? Who was she with? I didn't have the answers yet. But I was about to. Fate, or maybe just dumb luck, decided the night I would find out the truth. It wasn't planned. I hadn't set a trap or gone looking for proof. I had a late shift, one that was supposed to keep me at the precinct well into the night. But things wrapped up earlier than expected, and instead of stopping somewhere to unwind, I drove straight home. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Sarah's car was there. That alone wasn't strange. Maybe she had just gone to bed early. But as soon as I stepped out of my cruiser, I felt it. A shift in the air. Something was wrong. I moved quietly. Old habit. Years on the force had trained me to notice things, to pick up on the details most people missed. There was another car parked a few houses down. Unfamiliar. Not a neighbor's. My chest tightened, but I still wasn't thinking the worst. Not yet. The front door was unlocked. That was the first real sign. Sarah never forgot to lock the door at night. Then, as I stepped inside, I heard it. Muffled voices. A low laugh. The unmistakable creak of our bed upstairs. The sound hit me like a fist to the gut. My mind tried to catch up, tried to deny what my body already knew. My breathing slowed, steadying itself the way it always did when I was about to step into something dangerous. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was colder. Sharper. I moved up the stairs without a sound. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the bedroom door open. And there she was. Sarah. My wife. The woman I had loved, trusted, built a life with. She was tangled up with another man in our bed. Our bed. Sheets twisted around them, her body pressed against his, her lips still swollen from the kind of kiss that should have belonged to me. For a second, nobody moved. Time stretched out, pulling everything into slow motion. Sarah gasped, scrambling to cover herself, her eyes wide with horror. The man beside her turned his head, and that was when the second, sharper realization hit me. I knew him. His face was plastered all over the department's wanted lists. A fugitive. A man I had been searching for, along with every other cop in the city. The betrayal, the rage, the personal devastation, it all took a back seat in that moment. Instinct kicked in. My hand went to my belt, and before the bastard could even think about running, I had my gun leveled at him. Don't move. My voice was steady. Controlled. He froze. Sarah let out a strangled noise, halfway between a sob and a plea, but I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was looking at the man she had risked everything for. The man who was now about to spend the rest of his life in a cell. Sarah had made her choice. And now, I was about to make mine. Rage isn't a sudden thing. It doesn't explode all at once. It builds layer by layer, pressing against your ribs until it's the only thing left inside you. I stood there, gun drawn, heart hammering in my chest, staring at the two of them. Sarah, still tangled in the sheets, trying to cover herself like that would somehow erase what I had just seen. The man, this criminal, this piece of filth, frozen like a deer in headlights, his hands slightly raised, waiting to see if I'd pulled the trigger. I should have. I wanted to. My entire body burned with it, the kind of fury I had never felt before, the kind that makes your vision go red at the edges. I had faced murderers, gangsters, the lowest kind of people this city had to offer, and not once, had I felt anything close to what I felt now. Sarah. My wife. The woman who used to kiss me goodbye in the mornings. The woman who used to leave little notes in my lunch, who used to laugh at my stupid jokes, who used to say she loved me. The woman who had been lying to me. Sneaking around behind my back. Bringing another man into our home. Into our bed. I didn't even realize I was moving until I grabbed the bastard and slammed him against the wall. The gun was still in my hand, pressed right against his jaw. You really picked the wrong house. I snarled. He didn't fight. He didn't even breathe. He knew. He could see it in my face. I was 2 seconds away from ending him. Sarah was screaming. I barely heard her. Please stop. Just let him go. Let him go. A bitter laugh ripped out of my throat. I turned to her, finally, my hands trembling from the sheer effort of not losing control. Is that what you want? My voice came out cold. You want me to let him go? She had the nerve to look desperate. The nerve to plead with me. Not to fix this. Not to save our marriage. She was begging me to spare him. That was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I yanked the bastard forward, spun him around, and threw him face first onto the floor. He barely had time to react before I was on top of him, twisting his arms behind his back, slapping the cuffs on so tight he let out a strangled grunt of pain. "You're under arrest," I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "You have the right to remain silent. I'd suggest you use it." Sarah was sobbing now, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. This man? He was done. I'd take him in, process him like any other criminal. But Sarah? I wasn't finished with her. Not yet. The drive to the station was silent except for the sound of my own breathing, ragged and uneven. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, my entire body coiled so tight I thought I might snap in half. The bastard in the back seat didn't say a word. Smart choice. He must have seen it in my face. I was one wrong move away from throwing him out onto the pavement and letting traffic take care of the rest. Booking him was routine. Too routine. My body went through the motions, reading his rights, signing off on paperwork, shoving him into a holding cell, but my mind was somewhere else. I could still see Sarah's face, frozen in that moment of shock, her lips parted in some useless excuse she never got the chance to say. I could still hear her voice, begging me not to hurt him. Not begging me to forgive her. Not begging me to understand. No. Her first instinct had been to protect him. I should have been heartbroken. I should have been shattered. But all I felt was rage. Pure, burning, consuming rage. By the time I walked out of the station, my decision was already made. I drove home fast, tires screeching as I pulled into the driveway. Sarah was there, sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in one of my old jackets like that would somehow make me forget what she had done. "Please," she started, standing as I stepped out of the car. "Please, can we talk?" I ignored her. Walked right past her like she didn't exist. I slammed the front door behind me and locked it. Locked her out of the house that was no longer hers. Her voice was muffled through the wood. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. Instead, I moved through the house, room by room, erasing her. Every framed picture of us. Gone. Every trace of her in the bedroom, in the closet, in the bathroom. Gone. I grabbed her clothes, her books, her stupid little trinkets that she thought made our house feel warm, and dumped them all into trash bags. She was still outside, knocking now. Crying. "Stop this! Just let me in so we can talk." Talk? Talk? Did she think she could explain this away? That some pathetic excuse would be enough to undo what she had done. I didn't slow down. I moved like a man possessed, shoving her life into bags, tearing through the house, making sure there was nothing left of her in it. When I was done, I dragged everything out to the porch and threw the bags at her feet. "Take it." My voice was low, steady. Deadly calm. "Take your shit and get out." She stared at me, eyes red, chest rising and falling like she couldn't believe what was happening. You can't just throw me out like this." I stepped back inside. Met her gaze through the doorway. "I just did." And then, I slammed the door in her face. I stood in the quiet of the house, listening to the sound of Sarah sobbing on the other side of the door. It should have hurt. I should have felt something, grief, regret, maybe even some small sliver of hesitation. But all I felt was relief. The weight of it all, the lies, the doubt, the gut-wrenching betrayal, was gone. I had been holding on to something that didn't exist anymore, trying to salvage a marriage that had already been rotting from the inside. Sarah had made her choice the moment she brought another man into our home. And now, I had made mine. Her voice cracked as she pleaded one last time. "Please, just let me explain." I turned the deadbolt. The finality of the lock clicking into place rang through the silence like a gunshot. Sarah was no longer my problem. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sank onto the couch, staring at the walls where our photos used to be. The house felt different now, emptier, but not in a bad way. The air felt cleaner. No more pretending. No more waking up in the middle of the night, wondering where she was. No more questioning the way she smiled at her phone, the way she smelled like a man who wasn't me. This was my home now. And she wasn't coming back. I don't know how long I sat there, listening to the muffled sounds of her gathering up the trash bags filled with what was left of her life. I heard her car door slam. Heard the engine turn over. And then silence. I exhaled, long and slow, letting the last remnants of her disappear with the sound of her tires rolling away from the driveway. It was over. I had arrested a criminal tonight. But I had also freed myself. Tomorrow, I'd change the locks. Tonight, I'd finally get some sleep.